Remind his supporters of the things that they like about him, and to portray him in a favorable light. So, do you know if the sound should work?
I think so.
If it doesn't, then I can just narrate.
No, I think it will work.
Okay, we'll see.
If not, that we will. Hocam şey de olacak, pointer olacak bir de. Talha'ya sorsam.
Zannederim.
Okay, so no sound. Is the sound on the computer, I wonder?
I'm not an expert, but I will call the one.
Oh yeah. So it's just not, the sound is, oh, because we don't have a the VGA cable. Anyway, so you can just watch this and pretend that there's music, right? You can imagine music behind us, right?
Tamam, şey söyle, teknik servisten biri gelsin, hoparlör ve pointer'lar.
But we can move on if we not watching it is okay. So the point I want to make about this is that one of the things the candidates are trying to do here is to provide opportunities to their supporters to come and hear from them directly, right? So that they will be reminded of all the things that they like about. And this is particularly important because one of the things that candidates typically aren't doing with their social media platforms is trying to persuade voters who haven't made up their minds to support them. And I'll say a few words about why that is in a moment. But Obama's tack on his YouTube channel is to, sort of remind the American people of what they like about him. But that, of course, is not the only thing that candidates can do. We won't be able to see this, but if you go to Mitt Romney's YouTube page, Romney has done something different. In fact, the main item on Romney's YouTube page right now is a 30-second television advertisement attacking Barack Obama for not supporting the development of coal-based technology in the United States. This is an advertisement that Romney is running in the state of Ohio and in some other states around the country, designed to win over the votes of working-class voters. Right? And so Romney's tactic is actually not to put this, right now, at least during the campaign, is not to promote himself in a video like Obama is doing, but instead to weaken support for Obama by people who are watching this video. Right? And so this is essentially an ad in which Obama's record as president on energy issues in the United States is attacked by Romney. So the point is that candidates can use these technologies for different things. And they use the technology, and they've come to use them at pretty significant rates. The Pew Research Center, which is a large research organization based in Washington, D.C., that does a lot of public opinion polling, as well as research on political communication, news media coverage of presidential and political campaigns in the United States, for about 2 weeks in June, just after Mitt Romney had won the nomination of the Republican Party, they tracked the candidates' usage of social media. That is, how frequently they updated YouTube, how frequently they posted updates on Facebook, how frequently they updated their website blogs, and how frequently they used Twitter. Right? Okay, so if you had to guess, what do you think is the social media that the candidates used most frequently?
Twitter.
Good guess. Right. Why?
Because
very simple.
simple.
It's very simple, and you can't say very much.
Just 140.
Right? You can't say very much in 140 characters, so you have to use a lot. Okay, so this is the number of posts or updates, right, in each of these different media, right? So if you look at Twitter, right, if the presidential election was won by the candidate who issues the most tweets, Barack Obama would be cruising to re-election right now. And if Obama does win, you can say, oh, he won because he was on Twitter. That's not why he won, if he wins, but he certainly has taken advantage of Twitter much more than Romney did, at least in this period where the Pew Research Center was indeed studying what the candidates were doing. Right? The candidates also used their blog, right, to post updates about various things. And most of these are messages sort of explaining the candidates' positions on issues or attacking their opponent. They posted updates on Facebook less frequently, and YouTube less so. One thing to keep in mind is that it's not the case that the candidates don't use these other technologies. It's just that the Obama campaign's use of Twitter is making these numbers seem really small, right? Just because of the scale of the graph. But clearly the candidates are using these social media to reach out to voters, and that's something that they believe is quite useful and important. Okay.
The number of the followers.
How many followers?
The more important than the updates.
Mitt Romney right now has 60,000 followers on Twitter. And Barack Obama, I believe the last I looked, has about 250,000.
Which is not much.
What's that?
Which is not much for a country like the States.
Those numbers might be, so I might, don't quote me on that because I'm not sure. I haven't looked in a while.
Right.
But I think that might be it. It may have been, but if that's not it, what I do know is that the gap between the two is that large. That is, Obama has many more followers than Romney does on Twitter.
Does that graph also include the convergence between the different media, the different platforms there?
So you mean, for example, that they might be posting the same thing?
Exactly.
No, it does not. Okay. Right. I mean, so for example, some of the things that Obama's campaign was tweeting are probably also just appearing on. They've got them linked up, right? So it's just on Facebook. So no, these are not necessarily exclusive of each other, and in fact, we wouldn't necessarily expect them to be, right? Political campaigns and presidential campaigns, especially, are exercises in candidates. In the phrase that's used, staying on message, right? That is, the candidates have messages that they want to deliver to the public, and they use these different media to deliver them in different ways. But for the most part, they're basically saying the same thing over and over. For example, Obama is trying to say to the American public, I've done a good job, and I need 4 more years to finish the job that I started. Mitt Romney is saying, Obama has had 4 years, and he's failed. And he hasn't done a good enough job, so it's time for you to give somebody else a chance. Right? And so the messages that they're delivering are basically the same ones that they go around the country giving speeches about, for the most part. Right? Now, one of the reasons that political campaigns have come to use these technologies is because Americans are on social media, right? So at last count, roughly 50% of Americans regularly use social media in their daily lives in some way. So Facebook, Twitter being the most popular social media tools. Okay. Americans who are actually online, that is, those who regularly use the internet for either informational or entertainment purposes, which is most of the public, though not everybody. About 2/3 of Americans who are online use social networking tools in some way. So this is just to say that political campaigns have adopted this as a way of communicating with the public because the public is there. Right? Just interestingly, some of you all may know this, the rates of Facebook use in the United States are about 53%, or something like that, on a daily basis. That's the percentage of the public who use Facebook. The United Kingdom is second, I think somewhere at 45 or 46%, and Turkey is third, at 43%. Okay. So just suggests that Turkey is a country that is on the forefront of social media use. But what's important to keep in mind, and this is something that is a point of emphasis, something for us to remember, is that while it is true that Americans and Turks and Brits and others are on these social media sites, right? Most people use them for socializing and entertainment and posting photos of cats, right? This is a common thing that is done on these social media sites, right? Not using them for political purposes. That is, most of us, most of the time that we're on Facebook and on Twitter, are tweeting about things that happen to us during the course of the day. Sometimes we may be retweeting political things we hear from politicians or news stories, but a lot of what most of us use these technology for is for entertainment and for connecting with our friends. Okay. Yes, sir?
speaking of which, it's not for political reasons, for entertainment reasons, you said most people use the social media for those reasons. Do you think that those campaigns in the social media are useful for the elections campaigns for the candidates?
So they are, and there's 4 specific things that the candidates, I think, find advantageous and benefit from. And so I'm going to talk about them in a moment, right? So the slide after the next one it will answer your question, I hope. And if my answer is not satisfactory, then you can just ask me again,
okay.
Right? Okay.
Can I say something before you go on? This will just speak to you because you're American and you will understand political correctness. I have a problem with saying, okay, these sites are used for socializing and entertainment, and the cat video metaphor, because it could be put there for animal rights activism and not that.
Not this one. This is a cat giving a massage to another cat.
But I've seen zillions of cat videos in YouTube, Facebook, and other more alternative social media platforms that were there for actual animal rights activism. So just a side note to let you know.
So absolutely, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my point here is not to say that people don't use these social media for political purposes. It's only to say that the primary purpose for which most Americans use them for, not political. And there's a reason that I want to emphasize that, which I'll discuss as we go on. So the Pew Research Center did some surveys earlier this year in which they tried to get a sense of the way in which Americans use social networking sites for politics. And so they asked people a question in which they said, how important are social networking sites to you personally when it comes to doing a variety of things connected to politics? I'm going to show you the result. And people could answer one of 4 ways. They could say that given the things that the Pew Research Center asked about, that they were very important, they were somewhat important, that they were not too important at all, or that they were not important at all. So people could sort of essentially say, here's how important these different activities are. This is how important social networking is to me. And I'm going to show you the results that I've summarized. So let's just take out this first one right here. Just look at the first one. How important are social networking sites to you personally when it comes to keeping up with political news? About 36% of Americans said that social networking sites were either very or somewhat important, as indicating that they use them in some regularity to keep up with political news. Whether that's, maybe they like the New York Times on Facebook, and so they get updates from the Times, or they see news from their friends that's retweeted, things like that. But 64% of Americans said social networking sites aren't too important, or they're not at all important to keeping up with political news. What about debating or discussing political issues? Less than a quarter of Americans said that that was either very or somewhat important. Finding other people who share your political views, again, about a quarter. Recruiting people to get involved in politics, about a quarter of Americans. So this tells us that there is a group of Americans who use these social networking sites either for keeping up with the news or engaging politics in some form or fashion. But that there's also a substantial majority of Americans who just don't use social media for that purpose. Now, we can imagine that the people who are answering very or somewhat to these questions are the people who are the most politically engaged in politics. People who care a lot about politics. People who are invested in supporting one party or the other. The people who are less likely to respond that these things are important to them are people who have less engagement with politics. Right?
This is a question posed online to respondents?
No, this is a nationally representative survey, a telephone survey.
Telephone.
Yeah, so this is a national sample of Americans, which represents basically the views of all Americans. So again, the point is just that this gives us some sense about how much people use these social media for political purposes. Okay, here's your question, right?
Yeah.
So the question then is, given this landscape, given what we know so far, what we've talked about is that political campaigns are using these sites, right? They're using the technology. That Americans are there to be reached, of course, but that the social media, as they currently stand, are primarily tools for entertainment or keeping up with your friends and things like that. They're not primarily political vehicles. So what is it that campaigns do with these sites? That is, what are the advantages that they can provide them? What are they doing? Why does Barack Obama have a YouTube channel? Why is he posting 400 times a month on Twitter? Right? What is it that they're benefiting from? And I'm going to suggest that there are 4 primary benefits that American political parties and candidates get from social media. So as some of you probably know, in the United States, political campaigns are mostly paid for by private donations. That is, the government does not fund political campaigns at the presidential level for the most part. Most of the money that Barack Obama, Mitt Romney, and other candidates for federal political office receive comes from individual Americans who give them money. And they're good at raising money. Obama and Romney will raise and spend roughly $1 billion this year during their political campaigns. That's a lot of money. Allows them to buy television advertisements all over the country. Allows them to engage in voter mobilization, get out the vote, drives, and a whole host of things that political campaigns do. Political campaigns are expensive. So Mitt Romney on his website has a page where you can go and donate money to him. You can even check one of the selected amounts. You can give $15, or you can give $5,000 if you were so inclined. Okay? This makes it very easy for people to donate money to political campaigns. So let's just think about 20 years ago. If I wanted to donate money to a candidate in a political campaign 20 years ago, if I wanted to give money to Bill Clinton when he was running for president in 1992, I would have had to somehow figure out where I send a check. I would have had to get my checkbook, write a check, sign it, get an envelope, figure out the address to send it to the Clinton campaign. I don't know, where do I send that? Arkansas? I don't know, he's on a bus somewhere. How's he gonna get it, right? Put the check in the mail, find a stamp, put it in the mailbox, and hope that it got there. Yeah. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of work unless I'm really lazy, right? And maybe I am. But think how much easier it is today to be able to go on Mitt Romney's website, click $25, put in my name, my email address, my credit card number, click, donate. You can go on Facebook. You can go on Twitter. And if you sign up for Mitt Romney's Twitter feed and Barack Obama's Twitter feed, some significant portion of the tweets and the Facebook posts that you see will be asking you to donate money if you support the candidates, right? Oops.
Could they be a little more creative and write something like more appealing than make a difference? I mean, if I went there, if I logged on to this site, and if I was a real big fan of Mitt Romney and whatever his goals are for the states, just seeing that make a difference, I would just change my mind for giving any money.
Well, I mean, keep in mind that this is just one page on the website in which you can find out about Romney. You can find about a whole other thing. I mean, this is just one page on the site, so it's surrounded by.
I was just curious about whether Americans are really, into banal slogans like that in terms of, political. And I'm interested in political rhetoric, so to speak, and make a difference is, not appealing at all in the 21st century. So, I mean, and it's still used there for some reason.
So I don't know. I can't provide insight into why the Romney campaign put this particular.
Is it a specific slogan that they use, or it's just there?
No, it's just a general statement about here's one way you can actually make a difference, as opposed to just, in theory, supporting the candidate, right? Or mentally doing so. You can actually make a difference by helping him run his campaign. I think that's the message. That's not Mitt Romney's campaign slogan.
Okay.
So
let's change.
His campaign slogan is "Restoring America's Promise." So, okay. So Obama, you can do the same thing. You can click a particular amount. Okay. So raising money is something that is now made much easier through these technology, and that is beneficial to campaigns. One of the other things that they have been able to do effectively through these methods is by recruiting volunteers. Running a campaign, especially a presidential campaign, requires a lot of manpower, a lot of people to work on the campaign. And so just in the same way that it's easier for the people to donate money, if you sign up for the candidates, if you like a candidate on Facebook, one of the things that you will get solicitations for frequently is to participate in knocking on doors to remind people to vote on election day, right? And all kinds of other activities that are designed that the campaigns need people for. And so recruiting volunteers has allowed, the social media technologies have allowed candidates to reach out. This is perhaps one of the more interesting things as we think about the role of information in political campaigns. 10 years ago, the main way that presidential candidates for all office in the United States communicated with voters was either by running expensive television commercials, buying advertising on television, or holding a press conference, inviting the news media, making a statement that the candidate's hope is perceived as newsworthy by journalists, and hoping that they write a story about the candidate's position on the environment or some kind of economic plan or foreign policy. In that second thing, that second strategy, the candidates had to rely on the news media to report what they said. But now with social media, because the candidates can talk directly to the people who have signed up, who follow them on Twitter, they can circumvent the news media, that is, go around the news media to try to spread their messages that way. And it has given political candidates in the United States a much closer rhetorical connection to their own supporters. They can speak to them directly. And then finally, the fourth thing is that social media have helped political candidates turn out the vote. Turn out the vote, I mean, bring their supporters to the polls on election day. Mobilization efforts, the process of bringing your supporters to the polls, has become extremely important in American politics. The support for the two American political parties, the Republican and Democratic parties, are roughly the same. They have similar numbers of supporters in the country. And so election outcomes often depend on which party is more effective at making sure that their supporters actually show up at the polls on election day. Voter turnout in the United States is only about 62%, which means that if one candidate is able to significantly outmobilize their opponent, they have an advantage. Barack Obama took advantage of this in 2008 when he was able to, partly using social media, Facebook, and other methods, mobilize voters during the campaign, especially young voters who were connected in that way, and drove up voter turnout among Democratic voters. And that helped him beat John McCain in 2008. So again, because the candidates can talk directly to their supporters, they have ways of mobilizing the vote. One last thing about this is that there was just a research paper published in the journal Science, in which scientists, some of the data scientists at Facebook in California collaborated with some political scientists at the University of California in San Diego. And they conducted a study in which they experimentally manipulated people's Facebook pages, little to people's knowledge, by displaying whether or not their friends on Facebook had voted or not. Whether or not you voted is public information in the United States, right? You can actually get records of whether I have voted in every election since I turned 18. You can't find out how I voted, but you can find out whether people voted or not. And so on some people's Facebook page, there was information that suggested that their friends had been voting. For people who saw that on their Facebook pages, the likelihood of them turning out went up 3 percentage points on election day because of social pressure. Pressure from that their friends had participated in this political activity, and they wanted to do so likewise. So to the extent that the campaigns can use communication with their supporters, right, they can use these same sorts of tactics to try to mobilize them in a way that is only possible because they can speak directly to them. And it's easier to do so than ever before. So these are some of the ways that campaigns significantly benefit from social media. But the last thing I want to talk about is the limitations. So while it's certainly the case that these technologies are something that candidates have a good reason to invest in and to use, partly because they're very cheap. It doesn't cost a lot of money to run a Twitter feed, in the same way that it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to mount a national television advertising campaign. Nonetheless, there are some limitations that are important. So the people who are most easily reachable through social media are the candidates' supporters. The vast majority of people who like Barack Obama on Facebook or follow him on Twitter are Democrats. People who follow him on Twitter because they like Barack Obama and they want to hear what he has to say. The people who like Mitt Romney on Facebook are predominantly Republicans because they like Mitt Romney and they want to hear what he has to say. So that's useful for the reasons that we just talked about. It helps you recruit volunteers, it helps you raise money from people who are likely to give you money. But it only allows you to speak to the segment of the electorate that's probably already in your corner, right? And since mobilizing your own base of supporters is only one of the things that political campaigns have to do, that means there's necessarily a limitation on what you can do with social media. The other people that campaigns often try to reach are independents, people who don't have a strong affiliation with one party or the other, or people who, for whatever reason, haven't made up their minds until very late in campaigns. But the problem is that these are people who are not very interested in politics. The reason that in the United States, a person, the most common reason that a person is an independent in the United States, as opposed to a Republican or a Democrat, in most cases is not because they've considered both parties and they can't make up their mind. The most common reason is because they don't really know what the parties stand for because they don't pay very much attention to politics, because they're interested in other things. Sports, entertainment, whatever. So some of you may be familiar, probably most of you are familiar with Saturday Night Live, the television show in the United States, the sketch comedy show, which does satire, a whole host of things. Well, 2 weeks ago, they did a satire of independent voters. Independent voters who, late in political campaigns like this year, become the focus of the candidates because their votes are still up in the air. And so they're perceived to have enormous influence in the outcomes of presidential elections. But as political scientists will tell you, and people who study them, they're not very well informed. Well, it turns out Saturday Night Live also knows that they're not well informed, because they had a parody of undecided voters in which the sketch went something like this. This year, undecided voters will be very important, and we have a lot of questions. And it was a series of actors, of course, playing undecided voters, asking the candidates very probing questions so they could really figure out how they were going to vote on election day. Important questions such as, when is the election? And who is the president? The second part of this is he or she running? which is my favorite. Is he or she running? Right. And a whole series of things like this, right? So this captures the notion of who independent, undecided voters are. Well, these are, I mean, this is a joke, right? And this is, it's a parody. But it captures in many ways one of the realities of this. And so these are some of the people that candidates actually do have to reach out to. But they are not going to be following the candidate on Facebook. They're not following candidates on Twitter because they're not that interested in politics. So why would you click like Barack Obama if you don't care about politics, right? So this is the group that's least likely to use social media for political purposes.
That's why cats on the face.
These are people who are posting cats not for political reasons, but because cats are kind of cute, right? And when cats do things, it's fun to put them on Facebook. Right? So what this means, right? And this is a limitation. These are people who cannot really be reached through these media. Because you can think about what social media are. They are opt-in technologies. And what I mean by that is that they're technologies that people have to choose to use. It's content that people have to choose to expose themselves to, which is very different than television advertisements, for example, which independent voters, undecided voters, people who are not interested in politics might be watching Law and Order on television. And they're watching television, and there's a commercial, and suddenly they are exposed to an ad by Mitt Romney, by accident. But that has allowed the campaign to reach that voter in a way that they would never be able to do if they were expecting the independent voter to sign up for their Twitter. So just to provide you some evidence of this, this is data on Americans' use of new and social media by new media, including candidate websites, from November of 2008, right as the election 2008 was occurring. And the Pew Research Center asked Americans who were online, that is, Americans who use the internet. So these are people who actually use the internet. This is excluding people who don't typically use it. A variety of questions to gauge their engagement with politics in these media. So one of the things they asked them was whether they had visited the Obama-Biden website or visited the McCain-Sarah Palin website. And so they split the data up by people who call themselves Democrats, that is, these are partisans, people who identify with the Democratic Party, Republicans, and people who said that they did not have a political affiliation. So what you can see is that the percentage of Democrats who said that they had visited the Democratic candidate's website was about 41%. Fewer number of Republicans had visited the Obama site, not surprisingly, right? No reason to go there if you're a Republican. If you look at the McCain-Palin website traffic, only 18% of Democrats said that they had gone there. Maybe they were confused, I don't know.
Hopefully.
28% of Republicans had gone to the McCain-Palin site. But this is the number that's important for these purposes, right? Which is that the percentage of independents is lower than the percentage of partisans. That is, these are the people who are least likely to visit these sites. Now, this is not zero. I'm going to show you zero in a minute. This is not zero, but it's also pretty small. 10%, 15%. What about whether they had received an email from the party or candidate? Again, the number is lowest among independents. Whether they had gotten information from Facebook or MySpace, which is kind of dead. It's trying to resurrect itself as an entertainment site, but just 2% of independents said that they had gotten information about the election. Now this is 2008, so that number will be higher this year. But this tells you where we're starting from, right? And then, of course, the last one, whether they had friended a candidate on Facebook or MySpace, that's the zero. In this survey, this representative survey of Americans, 1,000 randomly selected Americans, of all the independents, 0 said that they had friended a candidate on Facebook. Just illustrating the point that I was making, which is that These are not people who care enough about politics to go do that. Yet they're people whose votes matter and who the candidates need to reach. So the very last thing I'll say about this, this is just highlighting what, is that the consequence of this is that traditional media, using the news media to try to get the message out, sponsoring television advertisements in which candidates attempt to portray themselves favorably to the electorate, are still essential for campaigns because they need to be able to reach these people who can't be reached mostly through social media. Last slide I'll show you before I conclude. It's 2012 now. You may look at those 2008 data and say, okay, Professor Hayes, but the world has changed in 4 years. Maybe you're just behind the times, Professor Hayes, which may be true. My car is very old. But in January, as the Republican primary campaign was going on, Mitt Romney and 11 other Republican candidates were vying to win the nomination for the presidential race. The Pew Research Center asked Americans, again, how they had encountered the candidates. In what ways, this is of Republican voters, people who were being targeted by the campaigns, how they had encountered them, and this is what they found. 72% of Americans had encountered the candidates in some way through television advertising. 25% said that they had received robocalls. Robocalls are just automated phone calls that the candidates will use to try to boost voter mobilization, voter turnout, and things like that. You pick up the phone, hello, and then it's like an automated, go out and vote for Mitt Romney on whatever day. Hang up. Had received some printed mail that is in their mailbox. Talk about old technology, right? Received like a piece of mail from a candidate. 16% said they had received email, so we'll call this some sort of new media, social media. 15% had visited a candidate website. But just 6% were following a candidate on Twitter or Facebook. So this just suggests that even in 2012, even after Facebook and Twitter have been around for a little while, there's still some limitation on the extent to which politicians believe they can be used to accomplish their political goals. Okay. So what can we say in conclusion? Well, just to summarize, obviously social media have become a real important staple, a prominent part of American political campaigns. You can just see that in the fact that the candidates use these technologies on a regular basis. And they're very useful for reaching the candidate's core supporters, for raising money, for recruiting volunteers, for mobilizing these voters who are already likely to support the candidate to go to the polls. But because it's harder to reach independents or undecided voters, people whose minds aren't yet made up, the traditional media remain very important for candidates in the United States. The last thing I'll say is that, of course, as time goes by, this may change. These technologies are still very young, and their role in politics is not yet mature. And as that happens, campaigns may find ways to target some of these other voters using social media. But to the extent that these technologies continue to be opt-in, where people have to be interested enough in politics to go seek out the information, it just means that there's going to continue to be some group of people in the electorate who are not very easily reached by social media, and campaigns are going to have to continue to find other ways to reach them. So I'll stop there. I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to watch the?
Yeah, maybe it will be interesting since that it's a part of the social media.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah. I mean, it will. Yeah. I mean, maybe it will be interesting to hear that Obama zendi. I hope it works.
No luck. The volume. There we go.
No one in the wealthiest nation on earth should go broke. 4 years ago, as I had the privilege to travel all across this country and meet Americans from all walks of life, I decided nobody else should have to endure the heartbreak of a broken healthcare system. No one in the wealthiest nation on earth should go broke because they get sick. Nobody should have to tell their daughters or sons the decisions they can and cannot make for themselves are constrained because of some politicians in Washington. And thanks to you, we've made a difference in people's lives. Thanks to you, there are folks that I meet today who have gotten care, and their cancer's been caught, and they've got treatment, and they are living full lives, and it happened because of you. We've come too far to turn back now. We've got too much work to do to implement healthcare. We've got too much work to do to create good jobs. We've got too many teachers that we've got to hire. We've got too many schools we've got to rebuild. We've got too many students who still need affordable higher education. There's more homegrown energy to generate. There are more troops that we've got to bring home. There are more doors of opportunity that we've got to open to anybody who's willing to work hard and walk through those doors. We've got to keep building an economy where no matter what you look like or where you come from, you can make it here if you try. And you can leave something behind for the next generation. That's what's at stake right now, Colorado. That's why I'm running for President of the United States of America. That's why I'm asking for your vote. I still believe in you, and if you still believe in me, and if you're willing to stand with me, and knock on some doors with me, and make some phone calls with me, and talk to your neighbors and friends about what's at stake, we will win this election. We will finish what we started, and we'll remind the world why America's the greatest nation on earth. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
So you see that? See what's and the sign up thing would allow you to volunteer, right? So that if you click the so here's Romney's. So Romney has other things on his channel. He has videos that are a little bit like what we just saw. But the thing that they're featuring on the front page of the website now is this ad that is running in some states, including Ohio.
President Obama is attacking Mitt Romney because Mitt Romney supports coal miners. But it's Barack Obama who said,
So if somebody wants to build a coal-powered plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them.
Obama wages war on coal while we lose jobs to China, who's using more coal every day. Now your job is in danger.
If somebody wants to build a coal-powered plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them.
Mr. President, let us keep our jobs. We can't afford 4 more years.
I met Romney.
Securitizing.
What's that?
How to securitize the political campaign? Probably will be. Yes. I mean, thank you, Professor.
Thank you for getting the speakers. That's great. That was useful.
I mean, now time for the comments and the questions that the Professor Hayes gives a brief a kind of the general understanding of that how can we the political campaign through to the social media, that some opportunities and the limitations and restrictions that, and now term is yours, floor is yours, please welcome questions and the comments.
Should I call him?
Yeah, of course.
Do you want to call
Please,
him?
please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I want to ask you about the digital divide. Actually, we hear from and also read from the articles that in many parts of the world there is a difference and gap between different classes and ethnicities, and also in gender who can reach the internet and also use social media. Is there any research related with the ethnicities in the United States, and also women and men? Is there any difference in their use of social media and also in their use in political activism?
Right, that's a great question. So, in the United States, there is a digital divide, right? That is, people who are wealthier, more educated, are more likely to have internet access on a regular basis, either at home or in the workplace, than are people who are lower income or have less education. And so that does exist. It's not as dramatic as it is in some other developing countries, obviously, but it is there. I don't know what the statistics are. I couldn't tell you for sure exactly what percentage of low-income voters have access. But what that means is that certainly it means that lower income voters are going to be less likely to be on social networking sites just because they're less likely to have access to the internet. And so those are voters that are more difficult to reach for the campaigns. I don't know of any specific research on the implications that that has for political campaigns and their use of social media. But I think practically one of the things that it means is that the Democratic Party, who is more popular among the poorer voters in the United States than is the Republican Party, has to use other methods to reach those voters to make sure that they turn out to vote, to inform them about what the Democratic Party is saying and when elections are happening. And so this is especially true among minority communities, ethnic minorities in the United States, Hispanics and African Americans, who disproportionately support the Democratic Party. The Obama campaign is not using social media to target those voters. Instead, what it's doing is using traditional campaign methods of recruiting volunteers to go into neighborhoods where those voters live and knock on their doors and remind them to vote and to make sure that they go to the polls. And so that's one way in which the digital divide is, I think, different, or is affecting political campaigns in the United States. Republican voters, who tend to be wealthier, right? That's not the same. The Republican Party doesn't have that same particular challenge with that group of voters because those are typically Democratic constituencies. As far as the gender divide, so again, I can't cite a specific number. I can't recall it off the top of my head. I believe that women are more likely to use social networking sites than are men. But I have not broken those Pew Research Center surveys down to see whether that's true for political purposes. So I don't actually know. But you could look at the Pew Research Center data, which is on their website, and actually you could actually download their data and actually look at whether, for example, those questions I put up there about, like how important is it to use social networking sites for political purposes. You could break it down by men or women. I know women are more likely to use Facebook and Twitter than are men, but I don't know whether that's true for political purposes or not.
I want to ask this. Is there any study that indicates directly the social media increasing the votes of any party, any candidate?
So the 2008 campaign, the presidential campaign between Barack Obama and John McCain, was the first campaign where there really was widespread social media use, Facebook, that kind of thing. I have not seen any evidence that directly links the use of Facebook to voter turnout in 2008. But it strikes me that it's very likely that Facebook had at least an indirect impact. Because one of the things that the Obama campaign did was spend a lot of time with volunteers on college campuses, making sure young people were registered to vote. And I think one of the ways that they were reaching out to those young voters on college campuses was using Facebook. So I think that there was probably an indirect effect. Now, but here's the more interesting thing. I don't know of any studies that show that campaigns using Facebook or Twitter has driven turnout up. There is an interesting study that was published in 2009 in the American Journal of Political Science that showed that, I think this was in a 2006 campaign, an interest group was able to get cell phone numbers for like a huge sample of young voters. And the day before the election, or maybe a couple days before the election, sent them text messages reminding them that the election was coming up. And that study shows that the young people who got text messages on their cell phones reminding them to vote were significantly more likely to show up on election day at the polls than people who didn't get those same text messages. So that's the only evidence, like systematic, empirical evidence that I've seen that shows that these kind of direct, the use of new communication technology, right, has directly affected voter turnout. Now that's not quite the same thing as social media because, me having a cell phone doesn't mean that I'm using social media. But it's that's the kind of dynamic that's possible, I think.
Yeah.
Your last comment was interesting in terms of text messaging because it's, I think there's a whole lot of, let's say, ICT for empowerment campaigns all over the world, including Africa, using text messaging and all those methods. But for political campaigns, it would be really worthwhile to look at if it has any impact in terms of somehow facilitating the mobilization of let's say the elderly rather than the youngsters, because youngsters use it anyway. They would use social media and text messaging in their daily lives, let alone the political involvement and everything. But you were talking about data dating back to 2006, but I would really be interested to see how that data would reveal in terms of the elderly in 2012, for instance. Is there any study in the States?
I don't know of anything that specifically looked at older populations. I mean, obviously, one of the challenges there is that just in terms of the sheer numbers of people you could turn out to vote is older people are less likely to be online and are less likely to use social networking sites than our younger people. One of the ways that we see that actually manifest itself in American political campaigns is that that's one reason that Obama has more followers on Twitter and has more people like his page on Facebook. Yeah. It's not just because Obama has like a cooler Twitter page or like a better Facebook page. It's because Democratic voters, or younger voters, are more likely to be Democratic than they are Republican. And so the population that supports the Democratic Party is more, kind of plugged into technology. I mean, it's a good question. I don't know.
Because it would also have an impact on the Republican voters, and it would be interesting to see the competition between the two.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't think there's been any research that specifically asked that question. It's a good question there.
Firstly, I want to thank you for this useful presentation. Then my question is not directly related with social media, but still related with American elections and campaigns. In Turkey, we can follow some of your talk shows like Jay Leno's, Conan O'Brien's, and Jimmy Fallon's. And I recently saw a video from Jimmy Fallon's show. Barack Obama was slow jamming with Jimmy Fallon.
I've seen that.
I know we have differences in our political cultures, but this is so unusual for a Turkish girl, so I shared
Seeing
this video.
Erdogan slow jamming the news would be unusual.
I wonder that your people, how do they think about this? How these kind of things shape their opinion for voting?
It's a really interesting question, and it is. I think that there's a lot of Americans who would react the same way that you do to seeing Barack Obama on Jimmy Fallon slow jamming the news. If you don't know what slow jamming the news is, let me explain briefly what this is. This is somebody reading, sort of recounting news headlines with the funk band The Roots behind them playing kind of like a funk beat. right? And so Barack Obama came on Jimmy Fallon's talk show, for those of you who have not seen this, and did this with recent news headlines, in which part of it was just like, sort of a political, it was like a campaign commercial essentially, but he was on a talk show and he did this. And it's something that's very unusual. It's odd to see a president, right, who is presiding over state dinners and giving the State of the Union address, right, and meeting with foreign diplomats, to go onto this talk show with a funk band behind him, right? So this has become something that presidents and presidential candidates since about 1992 have done on a regular basis. So Bill Clinton was the first presidential candidate to go on a talk show like this. He went on the Arsenio Hall show in 1992 and played the saxophone. and this was really a really dramatic moment in American political campaigns. And since Bill Clinton did that, candidates have felt more and more pressure to go on these entertainment programs and try to portray themselves as, sort of, for better, sympathetic public figures, but just for lack of a better term, just one of the guys, right? Somebody that the American public kind of feels comfortable with. And so one of the things that they're trying to do is they don't go on these programs to, promote their policy on Iran, or talk about their their program for generating jobs. They go on there to demonstrate that they're just like you and me. They try to be funny, they try to be nice, and they try to make viewers comfortable with them. There's some research that shows that, for example, in the year 2000, voters who saw George Bush on David Letterman's program or on Jay Leno's show, or when he went on Oprah's program and famously gave Oprah a kiss on the cheek. This actually boosted people's views of him, made him appear more favorable, and that actually helped him win the 2000 presidential election. Now, these effects are small because, for example, if I'm a Republican voter, if I'm a Republican and I really support the Republican Party, and I see Barack Obama on Jimmy Fallon's show, my reaction is probably not going to be, oh gosh, he's funny. My reaction is going to be, that's very unpresidential. Right? Because I don't like it, because I'm a Republican and I'm seeing things through a partisan lens, right? So the effects are small, but I think independent voters, for one, people who don't pay a lot of attention to politics, these are probably people who, it affects them when they see Obama doing things like that. So two things. One is, I think that's the sense that the way in which it can matter in campaigns. But I do think that many Americans kind of share the ambivalence, which is that it just seems strange, right? To see our president on the stage in Los Angeles, doing this. It's kind of odd. But it's become it's become sort of a normal part of American campaigns.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the strategy that goes behind social media and planning these campaigns?
In what dimension? Just in terms of what they talk about and how they deploy that? So I think what the campaigns do is, so when especially presidential campaigns, and I should say at the outset that in some ways presidential campaigns are very unique and unusual, partly because they have huge staffs, they have huge budgets, and so they can do things that candidates for the mayor of Washington, D.C., where I live, cannot do, because they just don't have the apparatus, they don't have the staff to do these things. So it's not the case that all political campaigns in the United States look like this. But at the presidential level, campaigns have a message strategy, right? They have a message or two or three that they want to deliver to the public. So that guides basically everything they do throughout the campaign. That's the speeches the presidential candidate gives. That's the advertisements that they run. And I think they take that, and map that to a social media platform. And what they do is they take that, and they sharpen the edges a little bit. And what I mean by that is because they know that the primary audience for these social media, on these social media platforms, is mostly their own partisans. They can throw their elbows a little bit more, right? They can be a little bit more critical of Mitt Romney without being afraid of being cast as mean, right? They can be a little bit more, you saw that video by Obama, right? that's not targeted at undecided voters. That's targeted at the base of the Democratic Party to get them whipped up, right? He's giving a speech and he's saying, here's what you did for me 4 years ago. Here's what we did together. So they take the standard message strategy and they tailor it for a more partisan audience. So that's one part of it. And I think the second biggest part of it is they use social media to try to generate news headlines, right? That is, they say things on Twitter or on Facebook that they know will grab journalists' attention in the hopes that news organizations will then write stories about what the candidates are saying online. And the best way to do that, I used to be a newspaper reporter before I became an academic. So I can tell you that the best way to do that is to criticize the opponent. Mm-hmm. Because journalists like conflict. They like conflict. That sells newspapers. That brings audience. That brings viewers. So one of the things that they do is they say things that are a little bit, controversial, right? On Twitter or on Facebook, and then direct the media's attention to it in the hopes that that will then generate news stories. So I think those are two things. One, they take the message strategy and then they sharpen their elbows a little bit, and then they use that also to try to generate news headlines. Those are two components of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Just one last thing about the undecided voters. You were talking about the strategy behind social media, and I was actually wondering whether that strategy could somehow be recoined for undecided voters as well, not specifically in the States, but just anywhere in the world. Maybe something the Dutch government did, I think, in the previous elections was a different strategy, at least. I mean, I don't know whether it succeeded or not. I didn't really read much around it after the elections, after the Dutch elections. But they, in the campaign, they recruited volunteers, young volunteers, and those young volunteers were interested in surveys and building data mapping of surveys as well. And what they did is they organized constructed their own survey questions around the let's say specific questions undecided voters might have. So they actually uploaded that survey online, and they somehow created a network to hook up with those undecided voters in the Netherlands. And as far as I could catch up with what they did right before the election, is that they were having that filled out. And what happens in the end of at the end of the survey is you're confronted with let's say candidates linked to, of course, different parties from different sects or ideologies. Which you might not be necessarily familiar with up until then, but then afterwards, if you're interested, you could read a little more on it, a little more, but not to the extent that you would, get fed up with it. Do you get what I mean? So I thought this was some sort of a strategy that could be just used anywhere in the world as far as it is adapted according to the sociocultural dimension.
Mm-hmm. To the extent that you can reach voters that way, I mean, I think that that makes sense. The problem is, how do you reach those undecided voters?
Probably has, talking about digital divide, has a really minor problem in terms of digital divide. So,
but it's not. It's not just about the digital divide. The digital divide, as I understand it, is mostly about kind of socioeconomic inequalities in access to. And that is not really where the divide between partisans and undecided voters in the United States lies. It's not really about access to the internet or access to these technologies. It's just about inclination to seek them out. That is, the desire to actually use them. So, I think what you're saying makes sense. If you give people information about the parties and then tell them where they stand in relation to the parties, that can be very informative to people.
You're confronted with candidates and descriptive information on candidates to the extent that you would be interested, sort of thing, and then to the parties. I think that's a good strategy.
Yeah, the difficulty again is just how do you reach those people who are mostly tuned out from politics?
But once you do, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor Hayes, and then thank you for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. thank you for the questions. Those are really great questions, really interesting. I enjoyed it. Thank you for Thanks.
Tamam. Okuldaki bölüm, yarın bölüm toplantısı yapalım diyorduk zaten. Tamam.
Yeah.